Welcome to episode number 221, where I'm speaking with Dr. Bhaswati Bhattacharya about Ayurveda's perspective on dairy. We'll talk about cow's milk and pasteurized versus raw milk, the therapeutic qualities of milk according to Ayurveda, and how eliminating dairy is not necessarily a good thing for every dosha. And also we'll discuss plant-based milks, so please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. This episode is sponsored by New World Ayurveda. If you're interested in working with client case studies from day one of your training, consider becoming an Ayurvedic practitioner through New World Ayurveda School. This way you learn the theory of Ayurveda at the same time as you learn how to apply it practically. Get a head start on working with clients by learning Ayurveda through being exposed to the most common problems clients face and how to correct them with diet, lifestyle, and herbs. The other interesting thing about New World Ayurveda is that you start learning pulse diagnosis from the very first day. They have had the most experience teaching Ayurveda online than any other Ayurveda school, and they have developed ways of teaching pulse diagnosis at a distance. And you get the chance to study Ayurveda with an MD through Ayurveda's premier online school, New World Ayurveda. For more information, go to newworldayurveda.com, and you'll also find that link in the show notes. Welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast, and I'm very happy today to welcome back Dr. Bhaswati Bhattacharya, who is a physician scientist, bringing the wisdom and science of authentic medicine such as Ayurveda back to the people. She serves as clinical assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at Cornell Medical College in New York, and she's also best-selling author of Everyday Ayurveda and another one in the works, which we're going to talk about later. Dr. Bhaswati, welcome back to the podcast. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me again.
Oh, yes, it's a pleasure. I really enjoyed our last conversation. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today because I get a lot of questions about dairy, and this is what we're going to dive into today. And I know you have so much information to share, so let's get right into it. Let's start with the general question. What is Ayurveda's perspective on dairy?
So Ayurveda has a lot of mythology around the cow and also science in Ayurveda around dairy and cow milk, and actually 8 different kinds of milk, and just the animal milks. And the mythology gives big importance to the cow as the cow herder. The most famous cow herder is Krishna. And so his foster family that he was born into is, a cow herding family, and he grows up in his childhood playing with cows, taking him out to graze in the field. And many people say that the mythology was given this way so that people would remember the importance of the cow. So whatever wiped out society, whether it was disease or old age or, conquest, at least the people that remain would always remember Krishna and the cow. So the cow has an importance in culture, but in Ayurveda, they the wise men really understood, because they watched, that when the mother who breastfed a newborn baby might happen to pass, let's say during the delivery process or soon thereafter, if they could find another human, which is called a wet nurse, another human being who was lactating, then they could have that nurse, that woman, feed the baby. But if they tried anything else, any other food, water, the baby would die. The only other milk that seemed to keep a baby alive was the cow milk. They tried different animals. There are some cultures, especially toward the deserts and Western India and Central Asia, where camels are used. But for the most part, it was the cow. And so the idea that cow milk could keep a baby alive if its mom didn't give milk or mom wasn't available gave the cow the title of mother. And so even today, people will say mother cow. And there's and there's a lot of other mythology. For example, when the demons and the gods were fighting over, heaven and earth, and who would rule, and they were having this big churning of the ocean, the Samudra Manchana. It's a very famous story. And as they are churning, all these things start coming out of the ocean. And one of them is a magical cow called Kamadhenu. And Kamadhenu, there's a lot of stories around her, but one of the important is that she can feed people and keep them well in case of famine or, bad crops where humans are fighting for their lives. She was able to go nomadically with them to different places, and she could provide them with milk and the foods that come out of milk and keep them alive. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff she could do that was pretty amazing, pretty magical. So there's a lot of mythology around the cow because of this importance that they found biologically that cows can keep people alive, which is in amazing contrast to today, where so many people avoid dairy like the plague.
Yes, exactly. So I'd love to focus in now on cow's milk and in today's world. And thank you for sharing that story, because it really helps us understand the importance of the cow in the culture and in the mythology. But talking it now modern day, where, yes, we have this mass moving away from cow's milk. Let's talk about the situation with cow's milk current day and what, type of milk is best. And the therapeutic qualities of cow's milk. So let's dive in there, if you could, please.
So there are several countries that have beautiful grass growing, and they have clean air, and they happen to have cows. And those countries are the only countries that actually produce milk. Every other country that is feeding the cows these agronomically vitamin-based formulas and hay and all kinds of pellets and things that they think are food, they are not actually feeding the cow. They are poisoning the cow. And so I tell people that what you're drinking is actually milk poison. It is not a healthy food. And so you can say that 99% of the milk in America is poison. And that is why people are allergic to it. In addition, there have been processing breakthroughs in technology that a lot of people who are quite ignorant about the ancient wisdom about cows, they have created all kinds of permutations because they're studying from a science that is so infantile. And so they produce, ultra pasteurized milk in these plastic containers that are refrigerator free, and they have powdered milk and condensed milk. And they think that all of these are the same because they measure it either by calories or by content of carbohydrates, fats, proteins. And they say, oh, okay, well, it's the same. It's the same. Most of the milk that is available today in the supermarket is poison, as I said, but it's reconstituted. There's all kinds of stuff put in it because of lobbying, lobbyists from the Dairy Council who have worked to allow the regulations to include the things that are convenient for the industry, the Dairy Council industry. And they don't give a hoot about your gut, your belly, your allergies, or any of that. They just need to sell what they want to sell. And people don't recognize that. They say, oh no, but I bought organic. Well, organic was really organic for a while, but then the industry decided they better buy up the organic trade because it was, threatening their market. So they just changed, they bought shares into organic companies, and then they got seats on the organic councils, and then they started changing the definitions. And so when you go today, organic doesn't really mean, there's a lot of loopholes, and they're purposely there so that they can do it. So the cow happens to be an animal that is one of the pickiest eaters that are around. And if you can just see that the cow that grazes freely is so appropriate to the season, appropriate to the climate, and will eat what it needs based on how its belly is doing. And so the milk that comes from it is actually the purest nectar that it can produce. And it's not intended, cows don't milk all the time. People who don't understand this think that cows just give milk all the time. They have to have a baby. It's just like a lactating mother. And so that mother is eating and producing for her baby who she wants to feed. And what we do, if you go to some of these videos of these American dairy farms, they use all kinds of really silly excuses to separate the mother from the calf in the first day. And the mother is sad. And so if she's eating things that are going to be good for the baby, and then she can't feed the baby, what's the quality of her milk going to be? It's going to be filled with sadness. And I don't care how, scientifically someone wants to say, well, those are just those are just imaginary. There's no real proof for it. There's plenty of proof. There's plenty of proof in the human literature and in the cow literature, and mostly it's ignored. And the reason that I know it is because I spent a decade of my life in my childhood in Omaha, Nebraska. And my dad was one of the most famous dairy veterinarians in India, and then in Germany, and then in England, and then in Nebraska. And so we not only had a stud farm, and we had cows, and we had, all the whole farm thing going on, which many people do in Nebraska. But we had my dad's wisdom. And he had grown up around the gir cow, G-I-R, which is the Indian breed that has that kind of hump back right behind the neck, which makes, for the most part, you can say they make A2 milk, which is a kind of protein. But the gir cow has the most, what can you say, therapeutic kind of milk. And so it's really important that people understand that if you're not having milk that is therapeutic, then what's going on, right? You're just having what? You're having watery fluid from a cow that's been eating stuff it doesn't want to eat, that's kept away from its baby. So, if we talk about serotonin and oxytocin and dopamine and all these hormones in our body, they also run through the cow's body, and it goes right into the milk. And if the cow is not making good immune particles, what we call antibodies, those antibodies are there in its milk, just like they are in human milk, to protect the baby until it grows its own robust immune system. And so when a cow is having inflammation in its body, which many of them do, it's just like having an autoimmune disease in humans, where you take their blood and they've got all this stuff, this schmutz in their blood, and it's all this inflammatory stuff from their autoantibodies. And so when cows have that, and then we eat that, when people say in America, oh, milk is for baby cows, it's not for humans, I don't fight it. I don't disagree, because I have to say that, in America, it is dangerous to give. It is for baby cows. And unfortunately, you're in a country that doesn't respect giving it to the baby cow. and then does give it to humans, which it shouldn't be. So I really tone down my milk consumption when I'm in the US big time, because I understand that it's, not good. And if you go to a restaurant and you go, let's say, have a cup of coffee, or let's say you're at a diner and you order it, you don't even know if that's reconstituted powder milk or if it's like some other kind of something. You don't know what kind of milk it is. And that's 99%, more than 99% of America. There is, luckily and happily, there is a certain number of people that own cows, that are farmers, that haven't given in to the factory farming. They just have a few cows. Yes. They want to own a small property, and that is growing. And they're not doing it in order to be commercial. They're doing it because they want their family to grow up the way oftentimes they did, which is with fresh milk. And they use that milk and they make all kinds of foods from it because they know that it's really good for their children. So that group of people is growing, but it's a very small number of people. It's not certainly not by any means more than 1% of the population.
Yeah. And oftentimes it can be hard, unless you have a local farmer who and you can access that milk, it can be hard to locate that milk. And as you're saying, ideally we want to have milk from cows that are happy in their own environment, in nature, that are eating seasonally. You talked about how intelligent cows are, and they'll source what they need at particular seasons rather than this meal that they get fed, this artificial food in big cow lots. So I'd love to talk about what's the ideal milk we should be having, raw versus pasteurized. If we're trying to source good quality milk, what type of milk should we be?
If you can get it.
If we can get it, yeah.
Getting good milk is like getting good pot. You have to have a source. You have to know where. I don't personally smoke marijuana. I never have. I think I'm the only person that's ever graduated from the University of Pennsylvania that never had a smoke, never had a joint. But everyone talks about their source, and then they do like a wink, wink to their friend. And I just kind of look at it like, what, you can't talk about it? No, it's, everyone's very protective. So same thing with milk.
It is.
If you know a good source, you don't talk about it because you don't know who's sitting in front of you. So if you can get it, there are actually many places, and there are certain networks online. They're usually off the grid, and you can find good milk that is raw milk. And I have heard, being a family physician and being not only a physician, but a public health person who was trained to the top level in vaccines, of the physicians that are trained, right? So I learned about all the different diseases and how we treat them. And I absolutely know that there are people that will shout at you and talk about, cows can produce tuberculosis and we have to pasteurize the milk because otherwise, do you want to give people tuberculosis? It's so dangerous. And they'll just parrot this stuff off. And, I used to try to argue back in my younger days, and now I just stay quiet and I say, Because before I had this care that if I educate this person, they'll become enlightened and then they will make a good choice for their health. Now I just kind of have this attitude that, okay, if you're going to fight with me, fight. I'm not going to fight to protect your, or to educate you, because you just are not ready. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, I can talk to people about pasteurization, how pasteurization is a process. And if you ask people what it is, most people don't even understand it. It's a process by which you quickly heat up a liquid and then quickly cool it to very cool temperatures. And what it does is it takes anything that's living, like a living cell, like a bacteria or a virus or tuberculosis, and it will kill it, because the high heat, if it's heat resistant, it won't be killed. But when you quickly cool it, the ice crystals that form disrupt the cellular functions. And so it's an amazing way of killing germs, which is great if you're talking about a slimy beaker that you want to wash out and use again for your experiments. But when you're talking about milk, which has a prana in it, which has proteins that are bodies, like their immune system particles, as well as a whole bunch of proteins like casein and various enzymes like lactase, which is the enzyme that can process lactose, the sugar. There's a whole bunch of different things in milk, and you are taking those proteins and you're very quickly heating them. And so they get disrupted in their structure, and then you're very quickly cooling them. And if they're just proteins that are just in the blood and not in living bacteria, then they get denatured. And the human body's immune system says, what is that protein? It kind of vaguely looks like casein from the cow, but no, it's different. It's all mangled. Oh, it could be from a bacteria. Let's go attack it. And if there are bacteria there, then yes, pasteurization will kill it. Great, wonderful. It's killed the bacteria. But after you killed the bacteria, where did you put the bacteria? They are swimming around like dead corpses in the milk, in the pasteurized milk, because they don't nanofilter it to make sure that all of the particles are out. So your body now encounters a fluid, an ocean of milk that has denatured proteins and cell parts, like cut up, blasted open cell part, corpses of this, the bacteria that were growing there. And the body says, now these are bacterial parts. I know this is a fraction of a cell wall from XYZ bacteria that I've seen before. Mount an immune response, charge. And the soldiers of the human immune system will go into the gut and attack it in a big way because they have actually rightfully discovered bacteria. So that's the little story of pasteurization. Now you take that and you look at all the different ways they're doing it. So they're doing ultra pasteurization and all different, degrees and combinations of how high it goes and how hot and how cold it goes and how much time between the heat and the cold. And when they make it super short time between them and don't give any natural cooling time, you get more and more warping of the proteins that are in milk. So any nutrition that you would have gotten from a natural milk product, you're not going to get. So that's the story of pasteurization and why I say pasteurization is just not great for the medicinal product or the medicinal qualities that are in milk. Then you go to the first part of your question, which was, what about raw milk versus pasteurized? Raw milk is going to have what the cow put out. If the cow put out bad milk because it wasn't grazing, then that's a problem. But if the cow was grass-fed in the pasture, not in an aluminum shed, not like sleeping and sitting among other people's cow poop because it doesn't get cleaned out and it's overcrowded and all that. If the cow was happily raised and the first milk went to its baby, and then what was left was milked into a bucket to bring for humans, that milk, which is what I get every morning here in Benares, that milk is then put into a pan and slow boiled. Stainless steel is inert. It works quite well. There are earthen pots that have been kind of cured with oil and made so that they can withstand heat. And those are put onto a slow flame. I see people taking milk and putting them on induction stoves at 1200 degrees to make it, very, very hot very quickly because they don't have time. That's not how milk should be treated. So raw milk should be slowly simmered until it reaches little bubbles. And then it should be removed from the stove and allowed to sit in a place with either like a mesh over it or, it can be open if you have a super clean kitchen and the windows are closed and all that. And let it come to room temperature. And then it can be put in the fridge. And I do that each and every day. The milkman comes. And that milk that is fresh is like in India, I've realized, being a person that didn't live most of my adulthood in India and now am, there's a lot of things that Indians do that they don't even need validation from the West. They just don't even discuss it. And before I was kind of shocked by it. And now I'm supportive of it. I laugh at it because we don't need the bullies of the West telling us how to do milk. We've been doing milk in Ayurveda for thousands of years. And that is how that raw milk is there. And I think it's so much healthier than the stuff that we have in America. And that said, all the properties that are written in the Ayurvedic texts refer to the milk that I just described in detail, the raw milk.
Right.
It does not refer to organic milk in a plastic carton. It does not refer to Trader Joe's because it's good enough milk. It does not refer to Monoprix milk in one of those plastic juice boxes. You have to understand the raw beginnings of milk, which is a cow, and then you can understand what her gift is, which is this liquid called milk. And if you interrupt any part of that, you're not getting milk. And so I tell most of my patients in cities in Europe and in America, as well as in parts of the world where they don't get cow milk, I just tell them, don't have milk, just have other things, have other kinds of milk, or have something else. I say, oh, but I love the taste of milk in my coffee. I said, well, then find something else you love. Because there are lots of teas you can have that are lovely, but why are you going to eat something that's going to provoke and worsen your your irritable bowel syndrome, or your celiac disease, or your gluten allergy? And I have many, many of my patients who take vacations in other parts of the world. And I went to Costa Rica, I went to Brazil, I went to Switzerland, and I had the milk there and I didn't get sick at all. And it was so delicious. How come? And what it tells me is that there are so many people that have become ignorant. The foil on a package, the plastic, container and the label have put foil over people's eyes. So they are disconnected from dairy. In fact, they don't deserve dairy. The blessings of the mother cow, they don't deserve it because they are just so ignorant of what she's actually doing. So they shouldn't drink it.
Yeah, it's so sad that how denatured the actual product is now. And I would like to discuss about the therapeutic qualities of milk, because Ayurveda uses it in many forms for its therapeutic qualities. So can we discuss about the beautiful raw milk and its qualities and how it can really be beneficial?
Yeah. So first thing is that there are many kinds of milk. I will say that the top 3 that we see are cow, buffalo, and goat. In India and in America, it'll be cow, buffalo, and I don't know what the number 3 would be for animal milks. I don't know if it's goat. I do see some goat. I do see some sheep's milk, and I do see some bison milk sometimes. But for the most part, let's just say it's cow and buffalo. Now, it turns out that someone renamed it because they had the power to. So milk doesn't actually mean cow milk anymore. Legally, they can use buffalo. And buffalo milk has very different properties than cow milk. So sometimes they pool it because it's very heavy. And they say that if you have insomnia, what you can do is go and have a warm cup of buffalo milk and you will go to sleep. It's actually used as a cure for insomnia for healthy people, not those that are allergic. So the milk that we have that is cow milk should be from a gir cow and not some kind of hybrid cow. And most of the A2 cows in America are hybrids. They've taken Jersey cows. Why Jerseys and why heifers? Because they put out about 20% more milk than a gir cow does. Yeah. So think about it as a woman who makes a lot of milk. Yeah, exactly. So a woman with large breasts makes more milk than a woman with small breasts. Okay, I'll have the woman with the large breasts. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the cows. Hey, this cow makes more milk. Let's have more of that. Let's breed her. And so these cows are maybe not the best example of what the Ayurvedic Vaidyas were saying. But what they said is if you take cows, and there are a few different species in India, there's a few dozen actually types of gir cow. And then there's a couple that are close to ghee, but slightly different because they've either been shipped here or they've migrated across, over thousands of years. And you have to keep in mind that Bharat, which is the other name for India, Bharat extended from what is now Afghanistan, the Kandahar market, which is on northeastern Afghanistan, all the way across Pakistan and what we know as India and Nepal, everything from the Himalayas down to the ocean, all the way down and around through Burma, through the Indian islands, which are called as Indonesia, which is Indian islands. And so from Afghanistan to Indonesia, all those peoples, all those ethnicities, all those climates, forests, mountainous, desert, whatever kinds of land there was and the different kinds of cows that were there, those were the different milks, right? The different cow milks. And after analyzing that, there were conferences of these wise physicians, and they would get together. And what they decided from watching thousands of patients and recording observations of groups of doctors was that, if someone is very sick, you can give them cow's milk when they're over the hump of being very sick and are starting to convalesce and gaining strength. That means they are actually hungry to eat. You can give them a glass of milk, and it is fortifying. It has things in it. When they said things, they weren't biochemical. They weren't sitting there talking about, NF kappa B and the various lactase and lactose and sugars and the various technical things that are said today that modern medicine says make it superior because it understands science better. In those terms, they talked about forces. And one of the forces they talked about was the ability to ground yourself and stabilize yourself. And that theme of grounding and stability is called kapha. And milk was certainly kapha. And the idea of growing your body and making it from something unstable to stable is called brahmana, that growing, that bulking. And milk is brahmana. But milk can also, depending on how you cook it, become laghu, which is langana. It's light. So what they were doing is experimenting with native raw milk and then all the different steps of how it could be collected and stored and processed and cooked and made into different foods. And they have different properties, gunas. So they noticed that if you took milk in certain times of the day, that could also aggravate vata, pitta, and kapha. They noticed that not only the gunas of, guru and laghu were there, but there was a certain amount of snigdha, which is this oily quality, this unctuous quality, which was really good for building not just the kapha, but the sinews and the muscles of the body. And they understood that it's really good for the body's growth. So that's why babies could have it and, it would work. They noticed that it was cooling. It was cooling to the body. So if a person was feeling hot, they could actually have some milk and the body would cool inside. So that was interesting. But if you add ginger to the milk or if you add some herbs to the milk and cook it, right, it changes the property. Mm-hmm. So then they realized, okay, milk will actually have different properties depending on what it's cooked with, how it's cooked, right? And the different times of day, so many different aspects of it. And they came out with 5 of the most important products. There's more, but the 5 that are the, you can say the most therapeutic are milk, which then has some bacteria added to it and is added just after it boils and it's coming back down to room temperature, and then kept out with an open top so that the aerobic changes can happen, oxygen requiring changes, and it suddenly becomes a solid, thick yogurt, which is called curd. So, and there's a technical reason for that. Yogurt can be different milks. It can be different processes. But the process that I'm talking about is a kind of yogurt that in India, we just call it curd, and that way everyone knows what it is. So the curd actually has very therapeutic properties. And then you go over and you take that yogurt and you put a churner in it. And at the bottom, it looks like a wheel. And at the top, there's a long stick, and you just turn the stick again and again. And the heavy stuff separates out from the liquid stuff. And you'd think that the heavy stuff would sink, but it actually floats, which means it's oil, because oil floats on water. And you collect that thick stuff that's up at the top that's floating, and that is called butter. And so you take that butter and you can collect it and keep it for 24 hours. And it's quite therapeutic. You can have it, and it's actually very good for consolidating your weight, like losing weight. And it's good for a lot of diseases. But for most people, they don't have day-old butter. They let it age for 2, 3, 4 days. And with that, if you subject it to heat, the thick, oily stuff becomes this transparent oil. It's called clarified butter, and that is key. So milk to yogurt, yogurt to buttermilk and butter, and then the butter taken and made into ghee. These 5 products, you can say, are the therapeutic ones. Does that mean paneer is not? Well, paneer isn't really great for you. It's not considered to be a very therapeutic product. It's a food grade product. What about, rice pudding? What about, there's so many different things you can make from milk. But these 5 are super good. And the water that was left over after you pulled out that oily floating butter, on the bottom, it's called buttermilk. And that buttermilk is some of the best stuff you can use when people are having problems with their digestive fire, like the people after COVID who can't seem to get rid of their acid reflux. It's very good for people who are convalescing. It's very good for a host of diseases. And you can put spices in it. So when you take that buttermilk, that water part of it, which has this kind of greenish yellow, light, not quite transparent, but translucent kind of liquid. And you put cumin and coriander seeds as well as leaves, and some black salt and maybe some ajwain. There's a whole bunch of different things you can put in, but usually people put in 4 or 5 things. Stir it around and drink that. That buttermilk, which is called dakra in Sanskrit, with the spices, it changes its name to chas. And so many people will go to hot climates and they'll see on the menu, it says chas, or it'll be like the refreshment drink that is brought out at the beginning just to cool people down when they first arrive. And that is very therapeutic. And, some people say, well, why? Why would it be therapeutic? Well, if you think about it, it's yogurt with all of the thick fat that's been churned out, and what's left in the water is very therapeutic probiotic. And so it turns out that dakra, this buttermilk, is one of the best probiotics you can give people after they've had food poisoning and gotten over it. And they're weak from post food poisoning, the recovery. You can give them a glass of dakra every day. Or when their digestive fire is low in the summer and they're not able to digest, they just need more fire. And that fire needs the bacteria, the microbiome, to do its thing. So you give them this buttermilk. Or you have various recipes. I'm not even talking about the medicines we make that are written in the text, in the Shastras, that you should use either milk to purify, like sulfur. If you take sulfur and you heat it, and then you heat milk and you pour the sulfur over a mesh or a cheesecloth into, like below the mesh, into a pool of milk. If you do that 3 times, it actually purifies the sulfur, and sulfur is an immense detoxification agent. So when there are cases of lead poisoning in like around factories, or it's leaked into the water supply, or you have metal poisoning, heavy metal poisoning, all these guys that worked in factories, metal factories, do you think they never spilled anything? Of course they did. And they got all kinds of inhalation of fumes and all that. And one of the things that Indian miners did is they would use the sulfur, that had been boiled in milk, and the milk is then thrown away because it's got, all the, you can say the unrefined parts of the sulfur in it. But you take that sulfur and then you make various medicines of it, or you crush it and you give a small amount to people, and it detoxifies. And one of the world's leading knowledgeable people, wise men on this, was the mentor that I have from my PhD in Ayurveda. And I remember when there was that problem in Flint, Michigan. It was the year that Hillary was running for president, 2016. And there was this big scandal in Flint, Michigan, how the water flows downhill to the poor parts, which happen to be neighborhoods that are predominantly Black, African American, and the rich neighborhoods north or whatever on the other side of Flint were white neighborhoods. And these people that were getting the river's water were getting lead poisoning. Yeah. And I told Dr. Jha about it, and he just said, well, all they need to do is have sulfur that's been purified with milk. And I remember thinking that milk has so many different applications, not only with sulfur, but with many metals that are then made into ashes called bhasmas. We use different parts of that 5. Sometimes we use the milk, sometimes we use yogurt, sometimes we use buttermilk takra, sometimes we use the butter, not usually the butter because butter is quite heating, but sometimes the ghee. And these different processes that create a more potent and useful component. If you think about what milk is giving you these little globules of fat, special fat that humans need because it's compatible with our biochemistry, our own lipid bilayer, as it's called, our own cell walls. These particular proteins are readily available in these milk products. And so to make medicines that replenish your trace minerals, which is what the bhasmas do, it just makes so much sense from a logical medical science, biochemical point of view. But I say this being a person that's learned the biochemistry, but is also aware of the Ayurvedic principles, which those modern scientists aren't. And what they're doing is, because of their arrogance that, they know better, they're actually missing out on some amazing wisdom that is known around how to use milk properly. And they haven't figured it out, and it's too threatening to their commercial structure. To figure it out, to say, oh, wait, maybe we shouldn't take the baby cow away from the mom. And if those baby cows are girl cows, they might be kept by the farm because then they don't have to buy a new cow. But if they're boys, they become veal and they're sold to the fine restaurants of Chicago and and wherever. So to put it nicely, there's a karma statement being made by those countries that are participating either directly or indirectly in the way that factory farming is going on. We already have so many people talking up the evidence, like the methane gases that are produced by the cows who have unusually high amounts of flatulence, and nobody thinks about why they have flatulence. And I'm like, wait, do you think that there was all this flatulence around years ago? No. Why has it increased? Because you're feeding the cows something that they're not digesting. People that don't digest well, human people also have that flatulence. They'll eat foods laden with preservatives and they don't understand because it tasted so good. And the ad said that the food was really healthy. So they decided to have it, and it's been FDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has approved it. So it must be good food, and the commercials are beautiful, or there's a celebrity that's eating it and he doesn't look like he has gas. But then these people eat it and they're just so sick. And you can see this increasing in America. I'm shocked at how people live. People talk about how clean they are, but their insides are so polluted. And they're polluted because they're having these poisons. So you can talk on the energetic level about the karma of it, and you can talk on the physical level about the flatulence. You can talk on the chemical level about autoimmune diseases. It's happening right in front of us. And the reaction has been in America to go vegan. Don't eat dairy. That's it. Not just don't eat beef or veal, but don't drink milk. And many people will not drink milk for, the first couple of months, and they'll feel fantastic and say, Dr. B, one of the best things I did is I became not just a vegetarian, but vegan. I got totally turned into it. There's this website that guides me. I have an app and I'm doing so well. Is that okay? I think you'll advocate for it. And I just say, being vegan is a choice. Being vegetarian is a choice. And my job is not to tell you what you have to do. My job is to encourage you to do whatever decision you've made at the best of your optimal health, for your body. That's what I'm supposed to teach you about. So, if you want to be vegan for a while, that's fine. And they clean out their bodies because they're not having all those preservatives and poisons and, other gunk that's going in their body before they became vegan. And so they feel really good. But within 6 months, 8 months of it, especially if they're Vata types, or maybe in a year, if they're Kapha types, they will lose some weight. They will feel better. And then they'll slowly start feeling fatigued. They'll start feeling very, very low. They'll go through depression and say, well, it's because it's January. It's not because of my vegan status. And they'll notice that they just don't feel the same. And so unless they are super allergic, I'll have them test it. And I'll say, I want you to just have some ghee in your diet. No, that's dairy. I said, it's dairy, but everything's been transformed. The bacteria have transformed the milk. The heat has transformed the butter. Try this. And if they feel more alive, if they feel more energized, it means that they were getting too dry and the ghee replenished that. If they can get raw milk, or if they're traveling, I say to them, while you're traveling, why don't you go ahead and have, some cream when you're at the patisserie. Don't worry about being vegan when you're in Paris, or don't worry, when you go to that place. Go ahead and eat and see what happens. And if they come back and say, I had dairy, and first of all, I didn't get sick, but secondly, I just felt more energized, but I don't know why. It could have been because I was at a wedding, or it could have been because I was also resting better. So I'll have them try it. And many people find that they can be mostly vegan, but once every, couple of weeks, they just have something that has some dairy in it. Clean dairy. And they do well. And I tell everyone, your body is your own laboratory. And there's a principle that I see more and more today as being relevant, and that is called satmya. It means that whatever you grew up with as a child is what your biochemical machinery formed when you were in this, very pliable state. It's like your brain was able to learn any language. And if you grew up in a language different from your ancestors, like let's say they spoke Japanese and you grew up in America speaking English, you will be fluent in English. The Japanese, where is it? You're not speaking it. So in the same way, your biochemical machinery will grow up with whatever food was presented to you by your beloved, whoever took care of you, mom, dad. And that, if it was filled with dairy in childhood, if you get to be 20 and you suddenly decide you want to be vegan and politically activist, fine. But when you get sick, you will need to go back to your dairy because your biochemical machinery will find that the easiest to process at what it calls food. And so I grew up with milk. Obviously, my dad had 7 cows when I was a young kid. And he did it because when my mom got pregnant with my younger sister, the Bangladeshi war was going on and we couldn't guarantee that we could get milk supply. He's like, okay, I have the solution. I'll just get our own cows. And so we had cows. Yeah. And so we had fresh milk. And whenever I feel either sad, stressed, something's happened, I just need to chill out, I don't even do it with anyone's permission. I oftentimes sneak it, like how people drink alcohol alone. I will go and I will do my milk thing alone because I have so many friends who are militantly Nazi about drinking milk, especially in New York. So I'll just quietly go and have really high quality handmade ice cream if it's, the time of year when ice cream's good. Or I'll just go and get some raw milk from the Union Square Farmers Market. And that's what I will have. And when I started getting sick, like right around COVID time, I knew that I needed to have clean food. And I instinctively knew I needed to go to a place where I could get it. And it was India. And I was already in India. I had a flight to go back, and I could have gone back to the US, and I decided to stay. And so since the pandemic began, I've had every single day fresh vegetables that were growing in the earth 2 days ago, fresh milk that came from Betsy this morning and was brought to me in the middle of the day. So these are all choices that people have to make around being, vegetarian and vegan, and what karma they feel. If they're really into yoga and they're very sensitive to subtle energies, then I absolutely agree that they should not be taking in meat, flesh, fish flesh. And if they can find an ethical source, then I would say have ghee. So one of my friends, Divya Alter, who runs Divya's Kitchen, she's a vegetarian. And she says, someone asked her, "Are you vegan?" She said, "No, I'm geegan." Yeah. And so it's become a term now. Yeah. So she is vegan, except she has ghee.
Right.
And it really is lovely for her. And she's actually found a lot of other substitutes for that flavor and consistency and, the kinds of dishes, since she's a chef, that would otherwise require dairy. She's found other ways to do it using, beaten cashews, and the water that comes from cashews is called cashew milk, or from almonds, it's called almond milk. So she's been able to use those kind of liquids in her recipes and substitute, so she doesn't have to have milk.
Exactly. And do you recommend, you mentioned earlier how if people are living in cities and they don't have access to good quality raw milk, that they choose other like plant-based milks. So do you recommend plant-based milks? And obviously they have different qualities depending on the nut, grain, or seed used.
That's right. That's exactly right. So milk that is raw is actually cooling. But if you process the milk in, let's say you keep it in certain vessels, like certain metals, like iron, and there's a few other types of like glass and stuff, it will actually change the property of the milk. It won't be cooling anymore because the surface will change the way the fat is globulized. We didn't even talk about the fat globs that are eliminated from modern milk, which is called homogenization. And homogenizing is it's thought to be one of the reasons why the fat globules can seep into the body and become plaques under the skin. Whereas when you have raw milk, the blobs don't get homogenized. And so they tend to do better. So what do I say to people in the modern world? I tell them, if you can get a good source, do. Otherwise, drink less of it. And then I just leave it at that. Because if you're living in a city and you can live among the smog and the dirt and the, all the other stuff in a city, then you could have a little bit of milk and your body will be able to process it. I'm not so, militant about it unless people have cancer or autoimmune disease or thyroid problems. Thyroid is actually a type of autoimmune disease. And so, I will tell people, be careful about the plant milk you have, because most of it is genetically, soy, first of all, most of it is genetically modified. Coconuts. Now, coconuts are funny because if you have them in Kerala, they're wonderful, but they will select the ones that are the worst quality and that are grown around electrical wires and various, energetic, yucky places. And they'll save those for the United States because U.S. people don't even understand or care about this stuff. So the U.S. is basically getting really the most dangerous or the worst coconut water and coconut milk. Plus, if you've ever opened up a coconut and you've kept it open for 10 minutes, it already starts going bad. So how exactly are you having it in a bottle? So people say, oh, well, there are these special processes that make sure that the water doesn't get old. You know what? That process is called a preservative. And what preservatives do to maintain the freshness is they keep bacteria from growing. So if you keep bacteria from growing, that's called an antibiotic. And so you're putting some form of preservative that, the designation between something being a preservative and being an antibiotic is very, very fine. And so there's bactericidal and there's bacteriostatic. Static means it just stops the growth, and cidal means it actually kills the bacteria. And so they put these into these different preservative classes that are then allowed to be given to the industry, food industry. And they put some of this into your coconut juice, your orange juice, your every kind of juice you can think of. But the milks, the almond milk, the rice milk, the coconut milk, the cashew milk, the soy milk, the what am I forgetting? Vanilla milk. Mm-hmm. All of these milks are having preservatives in them. And so they are not cooling and they are not milk. And all the therapeutic properties that you can read in the Shastras about milk don't count here. Right. They don't count. Mm-hmm. So you can have it, but don't think it's any better than having Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola has a different set of poisons in it, and this has a different set of poisons. So people say, but then what can I drink? I say, there's water. There's tea. Like tea gives you infinite choices. Put some herb in the tea. Use mint, use lemon, use tulsi, use, chamomile, use different herbs. There's something called a tea bag where you can dip it in and make a tisane, which is no tea leaves of like Camellia sinensis, the tea. But in America, we call it tisane, a tea, and you can have that. And they're like, oh, but I need something more. I'm like, well, what exactly are you wanting? Well, I don't know. I want something with a fizz in it. Okay, well then have bicarbonate water. Make that. Learn to make ginger water, ginger ale. That's where it came from. Mm. If you go back 100 years ago, there were a lot of drinks being made, and they were without preservatives for the first, couple of decades. Make those again. Yeah. And if people are lazy and they say, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just go out and spend a couple bucks and just take a can of, whatever the drinks are out there. And I just say to them, yeah, but just remember, what are you drinking? Like what you work so hard to eat organic food and, good diet and high living and all. And then you go out and you drink a, XYZ can of that beverage. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. And so people say, oh, Dr. B, I don't want to do Ayurveda because it's so hard. I mean, you guys just have these really tough food rules. And I said, I just have one food rule for you. Okay. Please don't tell me that I have to become vegetarian. I said, you can eat whatever you want with one rule. You have to tell yourself exactly when it was last growing as a living being on the earth. Mm. That's it. And then eat it. Mm-hmm. So I give them some examples. You're going to have those French fries. When were those French fries last potatoes growing inside the earth? Was it last week? Was it 6 months ago? Was it 2 years ago? Yeah. You're going to have that bread. When was it last a spike of wheat growing in the amber waves of grain? You're going to have that rice. When was that last growing in the the water of a rice field? You're going to have that fruit. When was that fruit growing on the tree? How long ago? And so I would just warn people to, look at these plant-based milks, look at the milk products, and get educated.
Right. Absolutely. And this is what has us in the trouble in the world today. The abuse of nature, industrial farming, such a disassociation from nature has caused this mass crisis in our health and well-being. And we're seeing it in places like America.
America's an amazing place that could turn around food and become really ethical. They could basically phase out all of the factory farming. And you know what it would take? There have been many people that did these calculations and said, if people ate half the amount of meat that they eat today, or if you only eat meat like 3 times a week, make it 2 times a week. If you just eat, or let's say they picked one day of the week that nobody ate meat, like in Catholics, I think it's Friday. Mm-hmm. If I remember from school, they didn't eat meat that day. So if some group would just make it that, okay, everyone eats less meat, the markets would absolutely collapse if they went down to, 75% or 50% of what they are producing right now. Right. And it would slowly phase out many of these, what you called cow lots. Mm-hmm. And it would you could rejuvenate the land and have grazing again. There's a lot of abundant land for grazing in America if they would allow for that. And that would turn everything around.
Yeah, but I really do still feel positive that we can turn it around. And I think it needs to start with bringing in more conscious capitalism, because it's capitalism that's driving abusing nature, getting the most out of nature we can, and disregarding, that it's a finite resource, and abusing animals and so on. So I think it starts with that. So there's not this industrial farming and so on. But in the meantime, while I do feel positive that is going to happen, and we realize that we can't keep abusing nature because, again, we don't have infinite resources, that as conscious consumers, we need to remember to eat closer to nature. And that means eating seasonally and locally and avoiding preservatives and additives. And if you can't source the good quality milk we're talking about today, well, then maybe even making your own plant-based milk from, good quality products. But definitely a very interesting discussion, Dr. Bhaswati. And I really appreciate you taking the time to detail all this, because it certainly is a big question that I come across in our communities again and again. And as we finish up here, I don't know if you want to make any closing remarks, but also want to tell people where they can find out more about you, your offerings, and maybe a little insight into your new book.
So the way that I know a lot of this is by going into the Shastras. If you are interested in reading authentic Ayurveda, rather than going to any author who's done their own interpretation, first read the source text. So in the Charaka Samhita, in the Sutrasthana, is chapter 26. And there's actually 4 chapters related to food, but 26 is the most focused on this topic that we're talking about today. And in the Ashtanga Hridayam, in the Sutrasthana, chapters 5, which talks about milk, and then 6, which talks about solid foods. In chapter 5, you'll learn about all the different milks. And it's nice to just read it and know where the source is. Mm-hmm. Now, since I was teaching this in the Dinacharya master classes last year, I found myself researching not just the Shastras and the Slokas, but how did we move forward from 5,000 years ago till today? Where did that food show up in India? What part of India had that food? And is it native to the subcontinent? And how do you take that forward to not only the various conquests in India that have changed the cuisine, like the non-Ayurvedic Mughal cuisines and some of the other cultures that have, kind of infested into the Indian food world, but the Ayurvedic cuisines that are there in different regions, how do they use these properties of Ayurveda known from the books to create recipes that are naturally healing and medicinal? So as I started reading about medicinal foods and foods that are used in particular diseases, I had to think about how do you do it in today's world. And so a lot of that wisdom is captured sloka by sloka and with very just great discussions in the master classes, which if you are involved as a practitioner in Ayurveda and you're interested, those are recorded and they are available in the masterclass system. So to access that, my website is www.drbhaswati.com, which I think you can put a link to that.
I will indeed, yep.
And if you want to learn more about the basics of Ayurveda, not just dairy, but just the basics of how to wake up, my first book, Everyday Ayurveda, appealed to a lot of people because I talked about the stories of how to do things. So I'm using a similar format because people like it so much for my second book, which will be about these things that I just described that I've been learning about food. And I'll be putting them together in a way that is not preachy, hopefully, but is really helping people to understand that there is a principle of food as medicine. And it's not something that the American College of Lifestyle Medicine or that the AMA's division on, preventive medicine cares about. It's something that Ayurveda has known for thousands of years. And it's being co-opted today by medical systems because they're realizing
what failures they are in preventing disease. So I'm hoping that this writing will help people to at least awaken to not only the medicinal potential of food, but how understanding the subtle energy of food can bring you into a greater place of nourishment and nutriment. And ultimately, that's what really makes the shift for people who are trying to work with their weight or with diseases or just their energy level. And they are just not aware. They're just not able today. But hopefully this book will take them one step closer to that.
Wonderful. That sounds amazing and very exciting. And do you have an idea of when that will be released?
Probably by the end of this year.
Wonderful.
It all depends on the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Bhaswati, thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Namaste.
Namaste. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Bhaswati, and please check out the show notes for the link to get to her website and all those offerings there. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to my upcoming Daily Habits for Holistic Health program. I'm starting a group program on February 21st, 2022. And in this program, you'll learn how to structure your day to flow with the daily energy cycles, rather than going against them and suffering. So learning all about the circadian rhythms and how to tune into these daily rhythms and really thrive. We'll discuss how to keep your mental health in a good place, discussing the mental gunas or qualities and how to maintain balance. We'll talk about the foundations of Ayurvedic healing and how to become your own healer. And we'll also discuss how to connect with your true nature and your intuition to help guide you in living a positive and fulfilling life. So we're going to go through this 28-day program as a group to encourage each other for support and accountability. But the program consists of short daily webinars, which are recorded, so you can watch them at any point. And we'll come together in a private community forum where we'll get to connect with each other. You'll connect with like-minded people, and you can discuss the program as you go through it and ask questions and give feedback. You'll also receive yoga videos tailored to each dosha, meditation tutorials, affirmations and visualizations, a pranayama tutorial, and worksheets to guide you along the way. So we know in Ayurveda, dinacharya or daily self-care practices really help to keep the body and mind in balance, aid digestion, calms the nervous system, prevents illness, and really promotes health and well-being. So if you're ready to implement a new operating system for health and well-being, check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. And if you haven't joined our social pages, please check it out on Instagram and Facebook at Elements Healing and Wellbeing. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you think this episode will be helpful to family or friends, please share with them. And if you haven't already subscribed or followed the podcast, please do so the new episodes will automatically download for you every Thursday. Until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.